Ahi Marie, ko Megan, tōku ingoa, he Collection Manager, Collection Care, o ki Tamaki Paengahira. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Megan. I'm one of many collection managers here at Auckland War Memorial Museum. I think we've got a ballpark of about 5 to 6 million objects here. We collect natural sciences, human history, and documentary heritage, so it's a broad range of collection types. I'm here today to talk about some work we've been doing specifically with the hazard and risk tables in Vernon. This is very much a project that is still underway, so this is more of an update than a review. So if you've got any suggestions or advice, please sing out. All right, so if you're not familiar with these fields, you'll find them in the Admin and Risk Assessment window, which is on the Risk Assessment tab here. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how we use the restriction type field, which is this one here, but a lot more focusing on the second tab over here with the risk to object and hazard in object tables. So flashback to 2019, we got an announcement for the coastal cormorant update that we were going to get a more detailed file for describing hazards present in an object or that an object is vulnerable to. And we also had the announcement of the new activity module, which was pretty cool. And I have to say that to start with, we didn't actually start using it. We were already using that restriction type field to record what hazards we knew about. And we had a user symbolic pushing the short name symbol of that hazard restriction type through to the one-line summary of the object windows. So we knew if we saw those 2 exclamation marks, we had a hazard in the object, no matter which window we had open on the object record, which was really good. So most of the terms in that risk table, we were actually using over here in the risk management activity module. And they were mainly used to record object incidents. So you can see they're pretty much the 10 agents of deterioration there. One issue we had when we were thinking about starting to use the terms in the object record is that these terms actually get used in both tables. So you could potentially have something that was a hazard in an object being used in the risk table, like radioactive, or vice versa, you could get vandalism in your hazard and object table. So I decided, of course, to jump on the forum and see if anyone else had been playing the same game and what they had done. And Kristen at MOTAT, hey, said that they had also been looking at the same issues, and their solution was actually to use the classification field and create a hierarchy in there, which Paul jumped on fairly quickly and was also quite interested. So this is what a very snapshot view of Kristen's hierarchy at MOTAT. And we had a look at this, and part of our issues, I think we already have about 180 terms in the classification field. So we decided to stick with risk and hazard and create a hierarchy directly within that field type instead. So here's Phil having a go in our test database, which is not live, and he's created a short hierarchy there. You'll note that he's created 2 physical forces terms. So one of them has a system ID 5 and the other one has a system ID 16. And that was one way that you can create the hierarchy, but and he suggested that the possibly better way to do it would be to use the broader and narrower terms instead. So with that under our belt, we then had to move on to figuring out what hazards we wanted to record. So my first stop was this Hazards and Collections website that is run by the Museum of London over in the UK. I used this on that initial hazard tagging project using the restriction field, and it's a really good resource for a really holistic view of the hazards that you can find in human history and natural history collections. The only main downside to this website is that it's based in the UK, so it looks at UK legislations, which is why I was really stoked to find Otago Museum's resource that they have published through their website called Hidden Hazards. It's completely New Zealand based, so it looks at WorkSafe legislation and other laws that we are working under, and it gives things like the dates that we stopped using asbestos in New Zealand. So yeah, it can be really useful when you're trying to figure out New Zealand-based collections. And these are some of the kind of categories that they used. I really like the name malignant plastics, and I did borrow it as a key term. And then if you go into the pages, they have a breakdown on where you can find the hazard, how you can identify it, what you can do with it, and who you can talk to for other information. So if you haven't already jumped on there, I highly recommend having a look. All right, so trolling through all those online resources, we looked at the existing restriction terms already in Vernon, and we had a bunch of our collection managers from various specialist collections add their input into the spreadsheet. And I think we ended up with something like 60 hazard terms that we were going to be adding to the database. Then my next step was to figure out how to update the existing keywords, because we had one table there and they had been used slightly. So theft was our biggest use in the risk to object field. That had mainly been used to tag high value objects. And then you can see down here that explosive was our biggest hazard in object tag. And that was mainly for our military collections, such as our hand grenades and other munitions, where we definitely wanted to know where they were. But you can also see that we've got things like incorrect temperature being recorded as a hazard in object, where really that should be a risk to object. In the end, I think I found over 500 entries where the keyword has been used in the wrong table. So we're currently having to go through and manually delete and then replace these entries. And I was very excited yesterday to hear some talk about automated bulk deleting. I'm not sure if it will help in this situation, but yeah, any tool that would help to do a find and replace lines within a table, yes, please. So then, now that we kind of knew what we were modifying, I needed to come up with a framework for what we were going to consider a core record for a hazard or risk keyword. And there are a lot of fields in this record. And I initially had a lot of fun trying to put information in all of them, but I soon realized that that wasn't necessarily a practical use of the record itself. And so in the end, we decided to keep it fairly simple. Up the top here, we have got the hazard or risk name. I've also put in there any linked materials. So this is the radioactive one. So I've got all the uranium, glass, and various other things. We've got the cataloging status. I've linked through to the hidden hazards website there in the external files. We've got our short name, long name, next higher term, and hierarchical level. And then over on the thesaurus tab, we've got a broader term as well, and a narrow one there. Now, the one fun thing I found is that the description field here and the summary field are the same field. So buyer beware on that one. But that was pretty much all we added to these records. So then we had to figure out how to use the rest of each table. For risk assessment or hazard assessment, you're also using a combined set of keywords. In this case, we already had a couple of terms here. Certified safe, we had been using for things like our hand grenades again. So when we'd had the Cody Point guys come in from the Army, I think it is, and they'd confirmed that there were no explosives left in the grenades, we were using this tag to confirm that in their record. So we did have some conversations here around non-hazardous or potentially hazardous or other sorts of keywords. And in the end, our main criteria for this field was, how are we going to use this data? Is it going to be something we'd search for using select statements? So we decided to keep it simple, and we just have the three categories here for now. We've kept certified safe. We've added identified by analysis. That's for a hazard or risk that we've identified using analytical techniques like our FTIR or XRF or a Geiger counter or something like that. And then identified from database is for where we've got things like taxidermy that was made prior to the 1980s. So we can safely assume it contains arsenic and possibly other heavy metals. So we wanted to give people a warning that there was likely to be a hazard. We wanted to tell them before we had the chance to tag and test it properly, being that we've got a very large natural science collection. So that's why that tag exists. And then now we are looking at the details thing, and this actually pulls through directly from the type field. So that was that it appears when you mouse over it in the table. So we wanted to have something really short there that was easy to view no matter what resolution of screen you had up. And it turns out that this set of data is actually pulled through from that summary/description field in the type record. So again, just keeping that nice and brief so that people knew what sort of hazard they were dealing with, and then the description of how to deal with it would be kept elsewhere. So assessment date and assess by, we all know how to use those ones, but the hazard and object table gets interesting with this measurement type field. We had a bit of a challenge with it because we've already got 140 odd measurement types in our system. And I ended up creating a new type for the XRF and the FTIR, which isn't technically linguistically correct. You don't measure an FTIR, you use an FTIR to generate the measurement. But again, we were thinking about how we're going to be searching for this data. And the answer was that it was more useful to be able to do a select statement for FTIR than it was to start talking about high resolution spectral data over a wide spectral range. So we're still looking for a good way to record our FTIR results in Vernon. Any suggestions here would be greatly appreciated. And please also consider this a plug for an analysis tab in the condition and treatment window in the object record. That would be amazing. Now moving on to our last little bits here, reading and notes. To be honest, we've struggled a little bit with the reading field, as again, the results from an FTIR or XRF don't fit here very well. It does work as intended for the radiation readings. You can see on the top there, we've got microsieverts per hour, but otherwise we're pretty much just using the notes field instead. So once we'd formalized all of that, we were ready to create this new hierarchy. And here's how we went about it. We ended up splitting up the hazard and object keywords into two groups. So we've got the has-no classifications, which we need for WorkSafe legal purposes, and health hazard, so we could label everything by a common name like arsenic and asbestos. And as with the test record that Phil created, we used the narrower and broader fields to link the has-no terms to the health hazard terms. So here's an example with a biological hazards, which is over here at level 3. And you can see down there, level 3 in the hierarchy. And it is nested under health hazard, then hazard and object. On the thesaurus tab, you can see that as well as health hazard, as a broader term, we have class 6 toxic substances from the has-no system. So we did this rather than creating duplicate terms, as we wanted to make it easier to search for everything under a specific keyword. You can also see that we've got the narrower terms sitting up here that nested under biological hazards. And when you look at those two broader terms under the authority options window, you can see that biological hazards is nested both under the health hazard and the has-no sections of the hierarchy. So what does our overall hierarchy look like? At the top, we've got the names for each table, which we've made retrievable, not usable, so that the terms are only there for creating the hierarchy, not for adding to object records. Below that, we have the 4 subcategories, again, all made RNU. So they are health hazard and has-no, and then 10 agents of deterioration and storage conditions. The 10 agents we still mainly use in the risk management activity module, but we can also use it for things like highly light-sensitive objects. The storage conditions hierarchy contains keywords for mainly our wet specimen collections, plastics, and other temperature-sensitive objects, as well as those stored off-site in facilities that aren't under our direct control. And over in hazard and object, under health hazard, we have a majority of the terms that we created, and you've got terms nested under them again. And you can also see that because we've used broader and narrower, you have things pop up multiple times within the hierarchy itself. And they show up across the hierarchy as well. So for example, ethanol, we've got here listed as a class 3 flammable liquid primarily, but it is also toxic to people. So it pops up under class 6, and it is toxic to the environment. So it's under class 9 as well. So the goal here was to make it as simple as possible for people to record the hazard. And most of the time, people won't be digging into that hierarchy to do so. They're just going to be entering the term directly into the type column. So This is pretty much what it will look like most of the time when people are using this field. And now we get to tags and search functions. So we decided to keep using that restriction type equals hazard field. This allowed us to keep that one-line summary instead of having to create some new user symbolics for the risk and hazard tables. We also wanted to be able to record results of failed tests in the hazard table, i.e. where hazards were not found. So keeping the hazard flag separate from the hazard and risk tables seemed like the best way to do this. We now have two options here. You've either got a checked hazard or a hazard. A checked hazard has been tested and been found to be currently safe, either because no hazardous materials were identified or because mitigations have been implemented. One example of this would be a taxidermy specimen that has no arsenic identified. The test itself is recorded in the hazard and object table with the date, but the object would be marked checked hazard. Part of the reason for this is that arsenic can migrate in taxidermy, and what is fine 1 year may not be fine 10 years down the line. Another example of a checked hazard would be an object that in its working life contained explosives, such as, again, a hand grenade, but that has been checked by our external expert and it's no longer containing those explosives. So the short name here was as close as I could get to a tick in the regular font choices, so that's why it's a square root symbol. An object marked with hazard has either been tested and found to contain a hazardous substance, or it's of an object type that is likely to contain hazardous material, and we haven't yet had the chance to test it. So it's best treated as if it is hazardous. So we're currently looking at adding a hazard symbol to our packing units, as many of our hazardous objects are housed this way. And often the packing unit is the only record that we'll look at when we're moving these objects. When viewed in a bulk move, as shown in the shot at the bottom there, we currently have no way to tell if there are hazardous materials in that packing unit. And yet, if you go into the packing unit record and you go to the general contents, you can see that this box in particular contains a lot of birds that have got arsenic in them. So our question was, can we push that hazard symbol up to the one-line summary? And Paul's very quick response was yes. So this is currently something we are working on. We're just going to have to be careful with our double exclamation mark Unicode symbol. But other than that, that's something that we're working on now. And one other thing here. So while risk type is a search field that's available in the advanced search by default, hazard type is not enabled by default. So if you guys are thinking about using these fields, you basically have to go through system maintenance and add it in there. But once you've done that, you have both your risk type and your hazard type as standard searchable fields, which is pretty cool.